Welcome to the Point. This past week, Governor Gretchen Whitmer delivered her third State of the State address. It was, as so many things are during this time of a pandemic, different in that it was virtual rather than the normal joint session of the House and Senate. Still, the governor was speaking very much to lawmakers when she called repeatedly for unity and working together and bipartisanship. Those calls were met with some skepticism, as you will see in the second half of the show. But first, here is part of what the governor had to say Wednesday night.
Last year, I gave my second State of the State address in the House chamber here in the Capitol. Like much of the last year, this State of the State is different, because it has to be. Tonight, it's just me and a few people in my Capitol office. And while it's different, it's an opportunity to speak directly to you, the people of Michigan, about the past year and our priorities in 2021. Now, at the risk of losing you in the first minutes of this speech, I'm going to use a Latin phrase, annus horribilis, a year of horribles. Before I tell you more, take comfort in knowing that tough years like 2020, our annus horribilis, are usually followed by great years. And yes, there's a Latin phrase for that too, annus mirabilis. Let's tap into that same energy and end the pandemic, revitalize our economy, and get our kids back in school. Let's make good use of this non-election year and work together. After all, we're Michiganders first. I know the Biden administration is deeply committed to following science, protecting public health, and building our economy back better. I'm eager to work with President Biden, Vice President Harris, and our congressional delegation to end this pandemic and ramp up our economy. And I'll continue to reach out to Republicans here in Lansing. While common ground seems less and less common these days, it's never been more important that we work toward it. Now, I know you're used to me saying, fix the damn roads. This year, let's also fix the damn road ahead. Let's find common ground to grow our economy, get families and businesses back on their feet. It starts by ending the pandemic. The health of our economy is inextricably linked to the health of our people. Effectively rebuilding our economy this year requires that we protect public health. And that hurdle is cleared easier and quicker if we work together. The governor's primary responsibility is the safety of the people of her state. During the worst public health crisis in history, we protected and expanded health care access in Michigan. I signed bipartisan legislation to end surprise billing so Michiganders don't get charged out of the blue for care. And we worked to address the high cost of prescription drugs. Prices for life-saving prescriptions have skyrocketed, forcing people to choose between getting their medicine, paying rent, or buying food. Last year, I announced a prescription drug task force. And just yesterday, they announced their plan to lower costs and increase drug price transparency. Members of my cabinet worked with a bipartisan group of leaders on legislation that ensures accountability and affordability to help Michigan families. Many thanks to Senators Brinks and Vanderwall and Representatives Witwer and Koopa and former Rep. Vaupel for their bipartisan work on this. Now, let's get this on the legislature's to-do list. During World War II, Michigan became the arsenal of democracy, building tanks and bombers to defend freedom and crush fascism. This year, we stepped up as the arsenal of health, manufacturing masks, ventilators, and PPE. And we were the epicenter of hope when the world watched the Pfizer vaccine roll out of Portage, Michigan. Since the beginning of this pandemic, the state partnered with health insurance providers to waive costs for testing and treatment. And we have performed over 9.6 million COVID tests, which makes us 7th in the nation. That is thanks in large part to the brave women and men serving in the Michigan National Guard. They helped with COVID, floods, and threats to our safety. As Commander-in-Chief of the Michigan National Guard, I want to formally acknowledge our Adjutant General Paul Rogers for his leadership. Our action saved lives. especially in our most vulnerable communities. Early on, Dr. Janae Caldoun, or Dr. J, as you've heard me call her, saw the disparate impact COVID was having on communities of color. By acknowledging this, we not only saved lives in Michigan, but around the country as other states learned from us. Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist chaired the Michigan COVID Task Force on Racial Disparities, focusing on education, testing, and outreach that further saved lives. Michigan leads the nation in reducing racial disparities of this pandemic, and the Biden-Harris administration established its own COVID Equity Task Force, modeled after ours. Dr. J and her team have led our effort to get Michiganders vaccinated. Despite many challenges, we have made great strides. We prioritized our brave healthcare workers, our educators, seniors, and vulnerable populations most at risk. And we created the bipartisan Protect Michigan Vaccine Commission to ensure we get this right. We are now in the second wave of distributing safe, effective vaccines. Michigan has administered over 800,000 vaccines, which makes us sixth in the nation. The number of vaccines we have administered has surpassed the number of recorded COVID cases in Michigan. I know people are anxious and ready to get the vaccine. That's a good thing. The fact of the matter is, we don't have the supply we need yet, but we will. And the good news is that we do have a plan to get 50,000 shots in arms per day when the supply comes in. Every eligible Michigander who wants a vaccine will get one. This process is like a locomotive. It'll be cumbersome and slow in the beginning, but it will get faster and smoother as we go. I just ask for patience as our frontline workers work around the clock to get shots in arms. Our medical objective is to vaccinate at least 70% of our population aged 16 and up as soon as possible. The quicker we do this, the quicker we'll have the normalcy we all crave. Family gatherings, travel, graduations, concerts, and more. In the coming months, the vaccine will be available to the general population. When very little seems in our individual control, the act of getting a vaccine is. And as we fight the new variant of the virus, we must all continue to wear a mask, practice safe social distancing, and avoid indoor gatherings. The good news is we know how to fight this virus. The coming months will determine the strength of our economic recovery. Let's end this pandemic. Make your plan to get vaccinated and keep wearing your mask until this pandemic is over. Let's join forces to jumpstart our economy. That means protecting small businesses. This pandemic has taken a massive toll on our small businesses and the people they employ. Where the federal government failed, we, the states, stepped up. Last month, I signed a bipartisan $106 million relief bill that directed $55 million to help small businesses impacted by COVID, including restaurant owners who've made incredible sacrifices to keep their communities safe. And last week, I announced the Michigan COVID Recovery Plan, distributing vaccines, getting our kids back on track, and supporting small businesses to jumpstart our economy. My plan includes a call on the legislature to permanently extend unemployment benefits from 20 weeks to 26. This would bring Michigan in line with 40 other states and provide hard-hit Michigan workers with the financial security and peace of mind they deserve. My plan gives crucial support for small businesses and resources to help them thrive long after the pandemic is over. It helps businesses like All Seasons Communications in Macomb County, owned by Beth Monicati Blank. I invite the legislature to partner with me on the health of our people, the education of our kids, and the resurgence of our economy. Let's get the My COVID Recovery Plan passed immediately. When we rang in the new year on January 1st, 2020, we had high hopes. We made resolutions, planned trips, in my case, a high school graduation. with our families and friends. It's easy to look back on this last year and focus on the bad, but we cannot forget the action we took to protect ourselves and our families. To those of you who stepped up and did your part, who listened to medical experts, stay home, wore a mask, helped out a neighbor, and practiced social distancing, your action saved lives. Your action ensured more Michiganders will be able to spend Thanksgiving and Christmas 2021 with their loved ones. On behalf of the entire state of Michigan, thank you. Now, to the legislative leaders tuning in, our job now is to fix the damn road ahead, together. Let's commit to the strong, bipartisan action we took last year and focus that same energy to end the pandemic, grow our economy, and get our kids back on track. The people of Michigan are counting on us. Here's to an Annus Mirabilis, a great year. Let's get it done.
If you would like to see the full speech, it's available right now at woodtv.com. Next, a Republican response of sorts from Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey and his take on the governor's speech and what he thinks the state should be doing to combat COVID. That's next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. After Governor Whitmer delivered her State of the State address this past week, Republicans in the legislature reacted. We talked with Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey to get his take on the state of the relationship between lawmakers and the governor. Senator, the governor delivered her third State of the State address this past week, and as the leader of the Republicans in the Senate, much of what she was saying was being said, I think, directly to you and your colleagues. Tell me what your takeaway was from that speech.
Well, it was a victory lap of some of the things that have been done in the past, some things that were done in a bipartisan, cooperative manner. And she staking claim for a lot of things that, actually we started and kind of drug her to the goal, across the finish line on. But then this heavy emphasis on calling for bipartisan and cooperation, it's a bit hypocritical, to be honest with you, Rick. Since March 13th of last year, I have met in person with the governor one time. That was on at the Romney Building out on the patio outside. And I don't know if it was August or September, but that was about the time of it. And there have been precious few invitations to have conversations. Most of the invitations to governor's events have been in the era of under the guise of presentations. I don't consider presentations conversations, and this is a very verifiable. Even the data calls that she says she actually implied that we don't respond to, which is also a lie, because we have somebody on every call. I've made about half of them, maybe a little less. But Senator Vander Wal or Senator McGregor, when he was serving, is on almost virtually every one of them. But those are presentations, they're not conversations. You can't do problem solving. You can't do working with each other when it's always a presentation. And she owns that, and I'm ready. I'm prepared. Almost every quadrant meeting, and quadrant meetings have been, up until this week, and I'll share with you an update there, have been mostly presentations. This week, and I'll give credit where credit's due, they changed the protocol and asked for input for the agenda for the quadrant meetings. And it was a wonderful thing. I had an item I put on, Senator Anna had an item he put on, and I'm hoping that that's a sign of things to come.
When you heard the governor talking about working together and cooperation, in fact, at one point she even said in this non-election year, did you take that as a signal that she is going to take a different approach than perhaps she did at the beginning of this pandemic, when I think a lot of people were trying to figure out what was going on? But however this has played out over the past 10 weeks, did you take that as a signal that she wants to do things differently going forward?
I'd like to take it as a signal, but she has proven that she operates by polls in information, and I think she's concluded, rightfully so, that that's what people in Michigan expect. But until we actually see actions that support the language, actions speak louder than words, then I'm going to paint me a skeptic, paint me a willing skeptic to be wrong. But right now, I'm hoping that she's sincere about it, but I'm not so sure.
When I look at the relationship between the legislature and the governor, I am often confused. I have seen you have moments of cooperation where things have gotten done. I've mentioned this to you before.
Yep.
The auto no-fault insurance, which I frankly didn't believe would ever happen, and making no judgment on it being good or bad, but just getting a deal. You got that done, but that was pretty early on. You did get a budget done in this COVID cycle, which was a smoother process certainly than the first one. But there have been a lot of places where you just don't appear to have any type of cooperation between the legislature and the governor. And just this week, 13 of the governor's appointments to boards and commissions were rejected. That's kind of an unusual move, and you said it yourself, it was to make a point, right?
Rick, I'm really glad you asked that question. It was a purposeful political gesture, not to score points, but to make a point. And that is that until this governor recognizes the legislature as the representatives of the people and treats us as a co-equal branch, we are relegated to be able to use only a few certain tools. The budget, of course, is one. Advice and oversight and appointments is another. Advice and consent, excuse me. Appointments is another. And this was not about any of the individuals on that list. Not at all. I admit it openly. It's about making a point that it's time to change. This governor has gotten very used to unilaterally making decisions. There isn't a single decision related to COVID that I can put my finger on that the legislature had any material heads up or input to. And that's just completely unacceptable. And, government really should only be doing two things: solving problems or exploiting opportunities. And I think if we're meeting and conversing, not just being presented to, that 95% of the time we should be able to agree on the definition of the problem or definition of the opportunity. And that's a great starting point. And then we start offering suggestions for solutions. It always, when that happens, results in better solutions than anybody doing it unilaterally. But we've had virtually no opportunity to do so.
What would you, as the Senate Majority Leader, like to see done? Let's pretend for a moment that the governor is sitting over at that big conference table in your office right there, and you were going to go over and sit down at the table. What would you tell her that you and your colleagues would like to see her do, that you would cooperate with her to do?
Well, I'd start with identifying that what they did this week with regards to changing the protocols for the agenda for quadrant meetings is a good first step. And then I'd simply say, do more of that. I'm not going to provide her a checklist of boxes that she could check and therefore everything's honky-dory. I'm not going to do that. This is a behavior change that needs to happen. And I think the people of Michigan see it. I think that they're fed up with it. I think she's getting a lot of pressure from a lot of folks that they can't understand the illogical and confusing orders that come out. And those are the kinds of things that we have to give her a hard time about. But I'd also would prefer to be able to avoid them, because that's all frictional loss that's unnecessary.
Well, what would you do if you were in a position, to some degree, that you could say, here's what we should do? Let me ask you specifically for restaurants. They're scheduled to open on February 1st at 25%. What would you prefer?
To me, this is just another example of illogical problem solving. 25% or 6 foot away from the tables. Why do you need both of them? If 6 foot away makes it safe, then let the restaurants have as much capacity as they can accommodate, placing tables 6 foot away. But adding on the 25% is, first of all, it's arbitrary. And don't give me any crap about it's based on science and data. And second of all, those two things can't really be resolved together. If it's 6 foot apart is good enough, then by golly, let them have as many tables as they can fit in there, 6 foot apart. That's an example, Rick.
And I'll ask for one more because this is a really hot button issue right now, and I know it's going to continue to be. There was an oversight hearing earlier today about winter sports in high schools, and the Republicans over in the House have come out with their COVID relief plan that would put some of that decision making back into the hands of local school districts. What say you when it comes to winter sports?
Those kinds of the decisions should be made for the most part at the local level. Another thing that is very frustrating, I know to me, and I suspect to the people of Michigan, is that one size fits all is a ridiculous solution for a state as diverse as Michigan is and as big as Michigan is. And, there's just no reason why there can be some guidelines provided for safety protocols and then let the locals decide how to execute. And they'll, by the way, if an unfortunate event occurs and there's an outbreak, they'll make the decision to stop doing that until a time occurs. Here's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that we saw, even in her presentation last night, when she decided to not make it with a mask on, okay? I'm hoping we're moving away from a control and fear theme into a informing, inspiring, and trusting theme. That is why our numbers came down. It's coincidental, maybe a little correlation, that the closing of the restaurants, unnecessary closing of the restaurants, may have contributed to the numbers coming down, but they were coming down anyway. It's because people are learning and they're embracing and they're doing the right thing. But there's never any acknowledgement. We have to keep the thumb on. Keep the thumb on. It's a definition and a difference between government having a light touch or a heavy hand. And there's no getting around it. As far as this governor in place, it's all about heavy hand.
The governor asked for a number of different things in her State of the State address, including a renewed call for the COVID recovery plan, which we talked about a little bit, and the House has their version. You said you're going to take a look at that. Right. There's also some jobs programs that she was laying out, talking about a number of issues, and we also know a budget will be coming up here in a couple of weeks. How much of this are you willing to deal with unless or until you start having more conversations?
So, not much. What I'd like, this goes to your question earlier about what would I like to see done differently. Let's take the jobs incentives topic, okay? That is, I'll call it a bit of a problem and also a potential opportunity to exploit. What I would prefer is we sit down and frame what the definition of that is together. And once we have that defined and framed, and we should be able to agree on 95% of that, then we start offering suggestions for solutions. That's what I think, that's how I believe it should work. And if the roles were reversed, that's precisely what I would do. And, but it's just not happening.
Final question, that budget will be coming down. Do you have any indication or any feeling if the budget process this year will look more like it did last year, which was relatively smooth, or like it did the year before, which was a train wreck?
I'm hoping for the former, not the latter. And but our stripes are not going to change. Our methodologies are not going to change. Our interests are not going to change. Our values are not going to change. And our respect for the people of Michigan is not going to change.
We'll have a final thought next. To the point. The governor has laid out part of her plan for the coming year, and the legislature will now decide how to deal with her request. A new budget will be coming in the next few weeks, which may further complicate an already complicated relationship. Something we'll be watching every week here. To the point.